Make sure your first cake is a success with these 10 tips for a beautiful and delicious first cake. If you struggle with leaning cakes, smooth frosting, dry cakes, or air bubbles or bulges in your frosting, these tips will be really useful for you too. Before you start baking, all of your ingredients should be at room temperature. So take refrigerated ingredients like eggs, butter, and milk out of the fridge at least 2 hours before. If you forget, put eggs in a bowl of warm water for a few minutes to take off the chill, and microwave ingredients like milk or butter for 10 seconds to warm them up slightly. Room temperature ingredients mix together the best, and this will result in a light, moist cake. Dry cakes are the worst, and to avoid that happening, check your cakes 5 minutes before the recipe's baking time. Poke them gently with your finger, and if you leave a fingerprint in the cake, put them back into the oven for a few more minutes. If the cake springs back up, like this, it's done. Leave the cakes in their pans for about 10 minutes to cool slightly, and then turn them out onto a wire rack and leave them to cool, which takes an hour or two. Meanwhile, make your filling and frosting. This is my 4-minute buttercream, and I love it because it's easy to make, it's delicious, and you can use it as the filling and frosting for your cake. The free recipe is on britishgirlbakes.com. Now back to the cake layers. For the neatest slices and to make sure your cake doesn't lean or topple over, level each layer after it cools by using little sawing motions with a serrated knife like a bread knife. Optionally, you can trim the bottom off too, the part that was touching the baking pan, so it's caramelized and has a darker color. If you're not going to eat the cake on the same day, keep it moist with simple syrup, which is just equal parts of water and sugar. This is half a cup of each. Cook on the stovetop over medium heat, and as soon as you see bubbles, turn the heat off and let the syrup cool. Then drizzle with a squeezy bottle or brush with a pastry brush, paying special attention to the edges of the cake which dry out the fastest. For a stable cake, the cake layers need to be level, but so does the filling, so spread your filling flat in between each layer. You can pipe it on by cutting the end off a piping bag and then spooning your filling into it, or scoop your filling up with a spatula or spoon and spread it straight onto the cake. Buttercream is the easiest to use because it gets firm when it sets, which will help hold your cake layers in place. Get down to eye level with your cake and check the sides of the cake to make sure that each cake layer is centered on top of the one below it, so that the cake is straight, not leaning to one side. If your filling is sticking out, it's worth spreading it flat with a spatula so that it doesn't get in the way later. Chilling the cake at this point is essential for 15 minutes in the freezer or 30 minutes in the fridge, so that the filling sets and the cake layers don't slide around when you frost them next. This is called a crumb coat, and it's the first layer of frosting on the cake. Don't skip it. It traps any crumbs that come off the cake so that they don't get into your final layer of frosting, and this way you won't see any crumbs in the frosting on the cake. The goal is to cover the cake completely with frosting, spreading it all the way down to the cake board so you can't see the cake underneath anywhere. The frosting doesn't need to be perfectly smooth because you're going to cover it up later with a final layer of frosting, but first, the crumb coat needs to set. So put the cake back into the fridge for 30 minutes or the freezer for 15 minutes until the frosting is cold and firm. There are 2 tricks for smooth frosting, and the first is to have the right consistency of buttercream. Add milk a spoonful at a time to thin out your buttercream. It needs to be smooth, but also just stiff enough to hold its position on the cake without sliding down the sides, but not so stiff that it's difficult to spread. You're looking for a peak that droops over slightly. This is perfect. I have a full tutorial on getting the perfect buttercream consistency, and the link is in the video description and up at the top of the screen. The second trick for smooth frosting is the technique you use. Spread buttercream up above the top edge of the cake to get sharp edges there later. Push your cake comb down on the cake board to line it up straight against the side of the cake. Scrape around the cake a few times to smooth the frosting and then fill in any indents or air pockets by spreading on more frosting and then scrape again. If you have air bubbles in your frosting like this, a plastic cake comb won't get rid of them no matter how many times you scrape. Switch to a metal cake comb instead and heat the edge of the blade with hot water or a blowtorch and then scrape again. And ta-da! No more air bubbles. For the top edge, swipe sideways without pushing down at all to prevent bulges in the sides of the cake. Wipe your spatula clean after every swipe, because if you don't, any frosting on the spatula will transfer back onto your cake and leave texture along the top edge instead of leaving it smooth. I recommend chilling the cake in the fridge before decorating it so that the frosting sets and gets firm enough to support the weight or pressure of any decorations, like stencils or piping. If you decorate it before the frosting sets, you'll damage it. To learn all about how to decorate cakes with buttercream, check out my cake school on BritishGirlBakes.com. Cake and frosting taste best at room temperature, so if you've stored your cake in the fridge, take it out 2 hours before you slice it, so that everything warms up to room temperature. Cold cake tastes dry, and cold buttercream is rock hard. It will be easier to cut into a cake at room temperature, and it will also taste much better. I hope this tutorial has been useful. Subscribe to my channel for a new cake decorating tutorial every week, and visit BritishGirlBakes.com to sign up for my free course on 10 frosting techniques. See you there!